Hi everyone, my name is Melanie Grant, and this is C&M Glass. Today we're covering topic part 2 of 2 for CPT Coding with our class 1015 Introduction to Medical Coding. The key points we'll be focusing on for this lecture video are on chapter 21.4 through 21.6, which covers notations and symbols within the CPT codebook, some of the official guidelines, just an overview, and category 2 and 3 codes. Our biggest focus though, I want to stick with notations and symbols. And I've given you guys a handout in last week's materials that you can review this week as well that covers all of the symbols and should be referenced throughout some of your coding exercises this week. Also, make sure that you take a look at this week's handout, which includes some of the code descriptions that you'll be using in order to select some of the answers on your homework and quiz for this week's materials. All right, so let's get started. Chapter 21.5, or 21.4, starts the second half of our Introduction to CPT Coding. By now, you should have identified that there's 5 characters for CPT codes, and that they're numeric on all category 1 codes. We'll talk about category 2 and 3 here in just a moment. So numeric codes. We've also talked about the sections and how they identify the different areas of E&M visits, surgical, radiology, not to forget anesthesia, radiology, lab and pathology, medicine, and that's it. So when we look at these, we want to remember the sections. E&Ms, of course, tend to be in the beginning, but they actually start with a 9-9. Your anesthesias being with your 0s. Your surgical, anywhere from 1-0 through 6-9. Radiology always starts with a 7. Lab and pathology always with an 8. And medicine also with a 9, but not the 9-9s. Keep in mind too that anesthesia has some 9 codes from the medicine that are going to be found with anesthesia. Okay, so just kind of looking at the first 2 digits there identifies the section. So we talked about our sections. We talked also about the organization, and we talked about indented codes versus standalone. And this will be something you will continue to want to understand. An indented code being a CPT code that is indented, as you see here, or a standalone code being one that is not indented and has a full code description. Remember, your indented codes always look to the previous standalone code for the full description, and will use all of the description up to the semicolon. And so when we put the code together, we're going to look at the standalone code along with the indented code description. So if we were to look at 2 codes together, we would see that 99201, and let me just kind of continue this to the right here to make it easier to read. (99201) would indicate an office visit for a new patient, level 1, and has the semicolon before saying level 1, meaning that the indented code below 99201 for 99202 is indented, starts with a lowercase letter, and only says level 2. To read this in full, we would say previous code that was indented was 99201, which reads office visit new. I stop here because of the semicolon, and now I go to 99202 to complete this thought. Level 2. So I would read office visit new level 2 for 99202. This, of course, is just an example and a brief summary of what we covered last week. If you have any questions about this or are uncertain about any of this material, make sure to review sections 21.1 through 21.3 before continuing with this video or this week's topics. You may also contact me via email or by text for any issues you may be having. If you're confused about any parts of this, keep in mind you'll want to reach out to me before completing this week's assignments if you have any issues and needing help to complete. Okay, so let's get started on this week's topic. Today we're going to talk mostly about symbols and notations within the CPT book. We won't be spending as much time on CPT coding as we did on ICD-10 CM, but we will be doing a little bit of practice with your own codes this week using some of the cheat sheets that I'm providing for you. If you would like to pick up a CPT code book where you can look at those specifically, they have them sometimes in the library, and you're welcome to pick up any year edition. But keep in mind, if you purchase a code book, you'll want to have the 2019 edition, and you'll want to make sure that you purchase the one for your next CPT class if you're planning on taking it next spring. Okay, so I've written here on the board some of the abbreviations or the notations and symbols you'll see within the CPT book, and this is all covered as part of 24.4. Some of the terms such as C and terms for and or. Let's start with C. When you see an indication in the CPT code book where it gives you a code description and it says C something else, you'll want to make sure that you look at all options possible. With CPT coding, there's a lot of lookup of things that could possibly be the right code, and if you don't look at all of those options, you may end up finding yourself in the wrong code selection or section based off of the procedure you're trying to code. So it's very important that whenever you're in the alphabetical index or even under the tabular index where you're looking at the code description itself, if you see something that says see this description, see other codes, always look at all options available and read up and down because sometimes there's additional guidance that you need to review. Also, just as with ICD-10 CM, if it says and or in part of your code description, the word and by itself also means and or. So keep in mind that coding in the medical world, when we're talking about, say, arms and legs, it can be arms or legs or arms and legs. They just want to make sure to cut as many words as possible, which can make it a little confusing. Terms with or without, such as with or without contrast, which is a radiological element or chemical that's used in order to dye certain parts inside the skin and make you glow on X-ray. If a patient has a procedure with or without contrast, that means you don't have to code separately for both. If you have a procedure that is with contrast, though, you have to code it. You have to find documentation stating it is with contrast. Otherwise, if you don't have that documentation, you'll need to go back to the code book and look for without. And there's a couple in there that might say things like with then or without then with, meaning that the procedure the patient had done started without contrast, and then they decided to add contrast somewhere in between. So there was technically two procedures done. In that instance, if the code description says without then with, you're going to code just the one procedure. If you're not sure otherwise, there may be specific guidelines that explain it to you. Our symbols here, we have the plus, bullet point, triangles, star, circle with a dash through it, pound signal, and little arrow within a circle. These are all indicated in the handout for you, but just to kind of summarize them. The first one, our plus symbol and our 0 with the dash, are talking about codes that do not need a modifier 51. Because it's not covered in this chapter, I wanted to give you a little bit of extra information on modifiers. A modifier is a 2-digit code that is added to your initial 5 digits and modifies the actual description. So for example, let's say that you had a office visit And let's say that you also had a